One of the problems you may run into when you're doing remote development with a device like a Raspberry Pi or a BeagleBone is the need to remotely debug something as the super user. This is commonly something that needs to be done if you're going to need to change things with the scheduler as far as prioritization, which is obviously critical when you're doing real-time systems work. It's also something you may need to do as you're doing I/O operations, or things that are not something that normally is done in typical user mode. This video here is going to show you how on the Raspberry Pi you can actually set up so that you can use Eclipse to remotely debug a device where the program that you are running on the Raspberry Pi remotely needs that pseudo access. Okay, so let's take a look at why we would want this first. So what I have here on the Raspberry Pi is a program that I want to run here that's going to blink a light. And I'm going to turn on my camera here. So in the corner there you see my Raspberry Pi. And if I try to run this, you see we get this error message, failed to set scheduler. This particular code that is in here, what it actually ends up doing, and this line that is failing here to set the scheduler, that is actually trying to change to use the real-time scheduling capabilities of the real-time extensions of embedded Linux when you take and recompile with the embedded extensions on. That's not doable unless you are the super user. So in order to get around that, if I'm just running the program, what I need to do is throw sudo in front of it, and you'll see that the Raspberry Pi light blinks down here at such and such a rate. And obviously I can change around once this comes to a stop here and blink another light here. So maybe I'm going to blink light 20 in this case. And we see another red light blinking. So again, this needs to run as a super user. If you take a traditional configuration for Eclipse and set it up, what will end up happening as we try to debug this is we're going to run into problems. So here is a setup that I've got here to debug this exact code. If I go in and start debugging it here, what will end up happening is the program is listening, the arguments are passed in, we'll get set here to get ready to start. The arguments are 4, so we'll be able to run okay. I can do a step over, which is F6. So F6, step over. I read my GPIO pin, I read the period. Excuse me, I get all the stuff converted over. I try to set the priority right here. And what we see is I didn't set the priority because I was not, again, the super user. And the program will exit out because of that, which is good. You don't want a typical user to be setting up prioritization and doing things like that as they go along. Okay, so that's the case. We're going to close out this debugging session because we need to make a couple of changes. So the first change we're going to need to make is actually up on our Raspberry Pi. What we are going to do is we're going to kind of cheat. We are going to create a bash shell script that's essentially going to invoke the debugger, or the server for the debugger, as root, which will now allow us to actually debug these remote applications as root. This is not necessarily the greatest thing from a security standpoint, but it is useful. It's very, very useful when we are doing these development activities. Okay, so to do that, let's go up to our Raspberry Pi, which is on this window that I've got open right here. And what I'm going to do is change cd/user/bin. Whoops. cd/user/bin, like so. I'm now at this point, and I'm also going to turn off my other camera here so you can see everything on the screen. I'm in this user bin directory here, and I can take an ls, all the files that start with G, and we see that there is on this program here GDB server right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create, like I said, a script. So sudo nano, and I'm going to call this GDB server SU. GDB server SU, GDB server SU for GDB server Superuser. Kind of cheating. Doesn't really matter. It can be just about whatever you would want this to be. So I'm going to set this up, edit this file here, and this is a new file. And inside of this file, what I'm going to have is sudo /user/bin/GDB server, like so, and any parameters that are passed along, like so. That is all that is going to be in this particular file, is this one line that will start the GDB server running with that elevated privileges of the Superuser. Okay, write this out, exit it away like so, and then we'll notice one other thing I've got to do. Like so, we can see the file there, but we notice it's not green. That particular file does not have executable privileges, so I'll just do a quick change mod. Change mod a plus x, GDB server SU, like so. And of course, where I'm at, I need to do that with sudo permission as well. And now we see that it is set up there as GDB server SU. Now again, this is not, from a security standpoint, the greatest way to do this, but you typically don't debug on something that's production, so you would not do this on your production deployed system. Okay, now the next thing we need to do is we need to make a slight change to our project that is set up in Eclipse for our debugging environment. So I'm going to go in and do that. So in Eclipse, if we go into our project config for our debugger, let me get this back to the Project Explorer here, and I can go down here to debug configurations. In our debug configurations, as they come up here, and I will get out of the way here, there is this tab here on the debugger, and then there's this thing called GDB server settings. So what we're going to do is, instead of running GDB server, we are going to run GDB server SU, where this SU that I have put in right here, that now gives me the ability to run this as a Superuser by running that script that I just wrote. I will apply this, and now I can go back to debugging, and if I turn my camera back on over here, what you'll see happens is, as we step through the code here, like so, read the pins like so, we got the scheduler, we set the scheduler because we were root, and now we are able to single step through this code that needs to be root. And you'll see it turning the pin on and off, and what I can do now, I can debug with single step, whatever I would like to do. In my case, I just want to resume, and you'll notice that that light is flashing, and now we are able to do any of our debugging that we need to do as the Superuser. So, slight change to our debug configuration, a slight change on our Raspberry Pi. Now we're able to remote in and connect to one of these devices, debugging using our Eclipse environment that's running on our Linux host, and debugging things that are going on here on our Raspberry Pi, remotely debugging with the GDB remote setup. So that's going to bring this demonstration video here to a conclusion.